So today we're right down in South London, right along the Thames estuary at Erith, right on the border of Greater London. When we get towards the end of this walk, we'll probably be walking right along the border of what's shown as the border in my 1970 Greater Atlas of London. Greater London Atlas of Greater London, you know the thing I mean. And this actually is the sort of like the second half or the end of one of the walks I did for my book, This Other London. And when I get asked what my favourite walk was in the book, very difficult question to answer, but the one that probably resonates most in my memory, if you like, and the one that I think had the most surprises, the one that changed my view of London the most, is this walk, which actually started down in Woolwich, and the first half of that walk you can find on at least one other video that I'll link to below. So I just had a real pang to get out here today, down to Erith. And I've not been back. I've not been back since I did that walk in 2012. I think it was August 2012. It's chapter 3 of the book. And yes, that is apparently pronounced Erith, like Erith. There was a little pronunciation guide on Bexley Council website when I was researching my book. Apparently it's an Anglo-Saxon name that could mean ancient haven, that's nice isn't it, or it could mean muddy harbour. Erith is a place of great history. It has its roots in the Mesolithic, and one of the main roads coming into Erith is called the Bronze Age Way. They discovered Bronze Age Beaker People burials in Erith. There's much more that we'll talk about along the way. And we're looking across the Thames here, over at Rainham Marshes, where we've been walking over the last year. In fact, it was about a year ago that I walked onwards from there. About 3 years ago, or 4 years ago, is it? I made a video on Rainham Marshes. But I've walked most of the way along the north bank of the Thames estuary. I've missed out a few bits, but I've still got quite a lot of the southern section to walk. This is looking west along the Thames, back towards Woolwich. The thing that really drew me out here to write about it for my book was actually the Dartford salt marshes. The original idea for my book was called Remote London. I wanted to go to the remotest parts of London, and that looked like the remotest of all parts of London. Technically speaking, part of it is just outside the boundary of Greater London, but it was an incredible location. But what really surprised me was the amazing heritage and history of Erith, a place that a lot of people probably don't really know much about. They've probably never been here, maybe, even unless you live in this sort of area of South London. But its history, right the way from the Bronze Age all the way through, it's got quite an illustrious past that includes where Henry VIII had one of his naval shipyards down here. It's actually in the parish church here that the rebellious barons first met with King John to discuss the terms of Magna Carta in 1215. That's just the tip of the iceberg. So it's a place with an amazing heritage. It definitely fitted into the kind of idea of being in overlooked London. Erith was also the site of a notable incident in the Peasants' Revolt, and a fella called Abel Kerr led an angry mob up the hill to sack Lanay Abbey, a wonderful abbey up there just on the next bend. Like I say, it's a place with astonishing history. It should be right on everyone's tourist map, although I suppose in terms of visible heritage, really what you've got is mostly along the waterfront here, as far as I found before. I'm sure somebody will add something in the comments below about hidden treasures of Erith that I will inevitably miss, because I'm heading along the riverbank here for the Dartford Creek and the salt marshes. It's actually just lovely to come down here in the sun, bask in the sunshine by the waters of the Thames. I remember thinking at the time when I came here in 2012 that it had a resort-like feel to it. And here's a plaque here commemorating the 800th anniversary of the founding of the ferry between Rainham and Erith in 1199. Isn't that incredible? Crossing this wide stretch of the Thames here. Erith Playhouse Theatre and the White Hart pub, although it doesn't look like it's still a pub. This wonderful mural on the side of the White Hart pub depicting a kind of typical Thames barge, a sprit sail barge approaching the Erith shore at the end of the 19th century. They've actually identified the actual barge in this mural, and it was known as the Chance, which was skippered by a local character known as Robert the Devil Austin. He used to drink in a pub. I wonder why it was called the Devil. And Erith was the starting point of the annual Thames barge race, first held in 1863. So this enormous Morrison's here. It's built on the site of the Pier Hotel, which opened in 1844 to try and capitalise on, well, a hope that Erith could generate a tourist industry based around its pier, which we'll visit very shortly. And the pier jutted out into the Thames, and 2 paddle steamers would stop here daily. So this was quite a grand hotel. And it had a pleasure garden which opened in 1845, and it had an archery field and a boardwalk and a conservatory and a maze and all sorts of fun and games going on. Sadly, it didn't really take hold, and by the 1870s it was in a lot of trouble, and it became various things over the years, including a coal depot. And then eventually the site became this Morrison's here. I like to think back to the grand days of the Pier Hotel when it first opened in the 1840s. The original wooden pier was built on this site and opened in 1842. And the idea was to try and capitalise on the steamboat that travelled between Gravesend and London twice a day. It took people into the city in the morning and stopped again on the way back, and I think a number of the gentlemen of Erith used to use it to commute into the city, the gentlemen of the stock exchange. And they would receive a breakfast served with wine on the way in, and then dinner served with wine on the way back out. So apparently they were pretty worse the wear by the time they got to work and then when they got home again. But in the opening of this wonderful pier here, there were various entertainments. There was duck hunting, boat races, pretty standard you would think for the opening of a pier. And then there was also a jingling match where men would hit each other with ash sticks till the last one was left standing. And this is the longest pier in London. I don't think it's got an amazing amount of competition, but it really is a majestic pier. It's a really beautiful structure. You really feel like you're heading out to sea, that you're floating out here in the Thames. This concrete pier was built in the 1950s purely for leisure purposes, I believe. When I visited here for my book, just behind me here there was a very large boat moored up. It turned out it was a large Dutch, well, I want to say barge, it wasn't really a barge, but it was a boat that was being used to carry the soil excavated for the building of the super sewer, to carry it out far into the estuary and dump it in at the mouth of the estuary. And they were just moored here, waiting for instructions, waiting to be called to come and pick up the soil to dump it. And they'd been sat here on their barge waiting for 2 weeks, and they had no idea how much longer they'd have to wait till they got their instructions to head into the city to pick up this dirt to then go and take it and drop it off. Had a kind of almost surreal feel to it. These Dutch sailors sat on their on the deck of their boat here, just drinking beer and waiting for their instructions. This is London, you know. This is in London. I guess the trains must have run along the pier here. That is where we're going next. Past all those works over there. The tide's coming in now. Looks to be coming in quite fast as well, doesn't it? Lapping up over the mud flats here. So on the road out of Erith, you've got all these kind of like metal recycling yards and breakage yards and stuff going on there with like aggregates and all sorts. It's part of a long tradition of kind of shunting these kind of trades and industries down the estuary away from the view of the city. You've got Belmarsh Prison back there on Plumstead Marshes. You've got the sewage treatment works at Crossness. It was part of the sewage treatment works at Crossness that opened in the 1860s, which put pay to the tourist resort and the pier here, because it was pumping out raw sewage into the Thames that just washed up here at Erith. But then you also had isolation hospitals on the marshes down at Dartford and Crayford. You had the prison hulks previously in the Thames, and down here you had floating smallpox hospitals as well. So this little road down here takes us back to the riverside, back to the Erith Rands. And here we have a different landscape again as we start our walk across the marshes here. Initially across Crayford Marshes, and we'll walk beside Dartford Salt Marshes. I don't think we'll actually be walking on that side with the amount of daylight we've got left. You've got Erith Yacht Club here, moored up in Anchor Bay. What a romantic sounding name that is. Just down here beyond the grazing horses, you can see the concrete pillboxes, the World War II pillboxes there, scattered across the marshes. This is an ancient landscape. There was a battle fought here between the local Britons and what was said to be invading Anglo-Saxons at the Battle of Crayford in 457, where the Anglo-Saxons prevailed, and that helped establish the Anglo-Saxon Kingdom of Kent. Bit of World War II infrastructure down here on the marshes. Looks a bit big for a pillbox. What was that? Some sort of tank trap or something? They have uncovered the remains of a dense forest that came right down to the shore here and would have been eroded by the water, they reckon, around 5,000 years ago. They have uncovered the petrified remains of that forest. I did read somewhere that some of the petrified tree trunks are exposed at low tide. I think what we have here poking up are the remains of a jetty, but somewhere along this shoreline there are the remains of that old Neolithic forest. This is some of the rarest and most precious habitat anywhere in Greater London here. Very rare stretch of salt marsh. It's like looking across the Somerset levels. It looks like our radar station there for the shipping on the Thames. You can see we're on the edge of an industrial zone now as we approach the Dartford Creek. And here we're walking around Crayford Ness. A ness being a bit that sticks out into the river. I believe the name comes from the French word for a nose. Le nez, is that right? I could be wrong. Anyway, that's where we are, Crayford Ness. We're about to hit the confluence of the River Darent and the Thames. So here we have the mouth of the Dartford Creek, the confluence between the River Darent and the River Thames, a sacred spot in pagan mythology. So I wonder what treasures have been cast into the river here as votive offerings. As a tidal river, it provided a valuable trading route to the towns of Dartford and Crayford, going back to the medieval times. And then in the 19th century you had Thames barges coming up here on the spring tides. And this is the £5 million flood relief barrier here, which is a cousin of the very similar structure at the mouth of the Roding and the Thames on the other side of the river there. The marshes on the other side of the creek there, the Dartford salt marshes, that was home to a number of different kind of noxious trades and industries. There was an aircraft factory there at one point. It's where they used to test some of the very early planes that were manufactured in Britain. Some of the early Vickers planes were test flown out there. And my favourite story is that there was a pyrotechnics factory, a fireworks factory over there, Astra Pyrotechnics. And they provided all the fireworks for the royal wedding of Princess Diana and Prince Charles. I should say Lady Diana and Prince Charles, because she wasn't a princess till they got married. But then the company promptly went bust, and all the employees were so fed up that they let off all the unused fireworks, like a massive firework display. So it's about half an hour before sunset. I'm going to end this walk up at Slade Green, just up here, as I did back in 2012 when I did the walk for my book. But there is one more very special location that I hope that we can see. It will be slightly dependent on the state of the undergrowth, but in many ways it's possibly one of the most magical spots on the walk. Ooh, I know, Erith Pier takes some beating, doesn't it? Anyway, I'll let you make your mind up quite soon. And somewhere along here we have the confluence of the River Cray and the River Darent, but I think we may be turning off before that point. This is where I'm slightly working off memory. You can see where the path curves around and follows the meanders of the river here. I think I take this path off to the right. I remember that hedge down there, it was full of birdsong, and Howbury Moat is just down here on the right, I believe. It is strange crossing paths with old walks. It's like you bump into ghosts of yourself. Yes, so here it is. Framed by that modern housing estate there, you can see the brick walls of a moated manor house, a Saxon moated manor house, which has been dated to around the year 900. Isn't it wonderful? The walls are still intact, and around it there's still the moat. It's a real treasure here, just slumbering in suburbia, right on the edge of Greater London, right on the border. Isn't that magical? Just here, just slumbering in the suburbs right on the edge of London. It's such an incredible location, and it's a perfect place to conclude this walk with you today. It's so lovely coming back and redoing this walk from this other London. August 2012, it feels like a lifetime away, doesn't it? It's another world altogether back then. Well, thanks for coming with me. I massively appreciate it. Thanks for all the people that have subscribed to my channel. We've got over 35,000 subscribers now. I never thought this channel would have that many subscribers, so thank you so much. If you enjoy the videos and you watch every week, you feel like subscribing, all you have to do is click the subscribe button and the little bell button next to it. Job done. And wow, thank you to my wonderful supporters on Patreon. And as I always like to say, I look forward to seeing you on the next walk, wherever that may be. I've got an inkling of where it's going to be, and it's somewhere a bit special. It may not be the next one, maybe the one after that. Probably will be the one after the next one, but it's a good one. It's a real good one.